Make-ahead dishes are not something to feed your husband. Poor Bob is still growing. This is why women raised in single-parent households are like this. While I was caring for my mother-in-law, who had somehow come up, said this sarcastically. My mother is right. You haven't even sent my shirt to the cleaners, and you're neglecting your housework. My husband continued in a weary tone. I replied with a trembling voice, I can't just leave my mother alone when she needs care. There's no one else but me who can take care of her. Then my husband laughed and said, just leave the dying old woman alone. I was so angry that I snapped back. How could you say such a terrible thing? We're family, we need to help each other. And you should help with the housework too. Then my mother-in-law said, looking down on me, help each other? Even if we had something to help with, there's no way we'd ask a single mother like your mother for anything. I was filled with anger at her words. She had been making me do all sorts of things, treating my mother like a single mother, and making fun of me. And now she was saying such terrible things. I'll never forgive my husband or my mother-in-law. I'll make sure they regret it. This is the story of my terrible husband and the fate of my mother-in-law. My name is Arya. I'm 37 years old and have been married to Henry, who is 3 years older than me and works as a company employee for 15 years. My husband is in sales for a trading partner, and we met through work. We've both been working for the same companies since we got married. My father died early, and I was raised by a single mother. So when my husband proposed to me, I was happy to think that we could build a warm home together. My mother, who raised me, was also happy about my marriage to my husband, and we soon had our son Bob. Bob is already in his second year of junior high school. If you ask if he's living happily, he's not. I have a big worry. At the end of a day's work, my mother-in-law called me. I couldn't ignore it, even though I thought it was going to be something again. Hello, what's wrong with you? Oh, Arya, can you go shopping for me right now? I just finished work now, and I have something to do after this. Just do it. Go buy 5 sets of Godiva chocolates. Got it. Wait. The phone was already hung up, and I sighed. Actually, this wasn't unusual. My mother-in-law always gave me errands to run, and if I couldn't do them perfectly, she would make sarcastic comments. This time, too, I had no choice but to listen to her and buy the 5 sets of Godiva chocolates and head towards their house. My unfriendly mother-in-law opened the door and rustled through the shopping bag. Oh, this isn't what I asked for. I wanted the seasonal set. Looking at what I had bought her, she exaggeratedly said, no, it's 5 sets of Godiva chocolates, just like you asked. I said in confusion, what are you talking about? I clearly said seasonal set. You bought something different, so I won't pay. That's troubling. You have to pay for it. It costs $30. Oh no, you're greedy for money too. That's why people who grow up in single-parent households become so greedy, right? Dad, my father-in-law, who had been spoken to by my mother-in-law, looked at me without looking up from his newspaper and said only, "Oh, I bit my tongue in frustration. My father-in-law runs his own business, and my mother-in-law is a housewife. They should have been quite wealthy financially, but they always make me bring them things and then complain about them or refuse to pay for them. My mother-in-law, who always belittles me with glee, and my father-in-law, who is indifferent to it. It's always the same, but when it's repeated like this, it's hard to feel good. Well, excuse me, I left my in-laws' house in tears, with my mother-in-law eating yokan with satisfaction behind me, and then I hurriedly headed to the hospital. When I opened the door to the hospital room, I saw Bob's back in his school uniform. Bob, you came. How are you feeling? Bob and Mom greeted me with a smile. Good job, Mom. Arya, thank you for coming today. You worked hard. My mother had a mild stroke and was hospitalized. My kind mother raised me on her own while working as a caregiver after my father died. Arya, are you doing well with Henry? Are you okay? I'm fine, Mom. Don't worry. I didn't want to worry my mother, who always wishes for my happiness first and foremost, so I couldn't tell her what was happening at my in-laws' house. After talking to my mother, who was lying in bed for a while, and taking care of her change of clothes, I left the hospital with Bob in the car. On the way back home, I talked to Bob. Bob tells me about school and friends little by little. He's been a little cheeky lately because he's in puberty, but he's basically a good kid. Bob, thank you for always visiting Grandma. It's okay. I like Grandma on your side because she's kind. But no, it's nothing. We had such a conversation and returned home. My husband had already finished work and was leaning back on the sofa, watching TV. I'm home. Sorry it took so long. Hey, where's my food? It's not ready yet. I was asked to do something by your mother after work. Shut up. Stop making excuses and make it quickly. My husband didn't listen to me and shouted at me. While feeling dissatisfied with him for not listening to me either, I started doing housework anyway. I can work hard because of my mother and Bob. I felt that way as I moved my hands. While living such days, one day I received a call from the hospital. My mother's stroke had recurred. We immediately had surgery, but the results were not good, and she was left with severe disabilities. My mother could no longer move her body or speak, and so began my life as a caregiver. I visited my mother before or after work and took care of her daily needs with all my might. I told the company about my situation, and they were flexible with me, but there were times when household chores became neglected, so my husband started complaining more often. One day, when I returned home tired from the hospital, my mother-in-law had come to visit without notice. My husband was already home too. "Oh, welcome back, Mrs." My mother-in-law said sarcastically. "I'm sorry. I went to see my mother at the hospital." "Mother-in-law, why did you come today?" "Another visit. Henry said there was no dinner, so I bought some side dishes." My husband ate the side dishes that his mother had apparently bought for him, looking unhappy. "What? You said this morning that you put it in the refrigerator wrapped up." When I told my husband that his mother had said that, he replied sharply, "Make-ahead dishes are not something to feed your husband. Poor Bob is still growing. This is why women raised in single-parent households are like this." My husband continued in a weary tone, "My mother is right. You haven't even sent my shirt to the cleaners, and you're neglecting your housework," he said. I replied with a trembling voice, "I can't just leave my mother alone when she needs care. There's no one else but me who can take care of her." Then my husband laughed and said, "Just leave the dying old woman alone." I was so angry that I snapped back. "How could you say such a terrible thing? We're family, we need to help each other, and you should help with the housework too." Then my mother-in-law looked down on me, "Help each other. Even if we had something to help with, there's no way we'd ask a single mother like your mother for anything." I was filled with anger at her words. "Shut up and do the housework. If something like this happens again, I won't forgive you." I wanted to shout at my husband's words. I couldn't be assertive when I thought of my mother and Bob. I didn't want to worry my mother in her sick bed, and for Bob's sake, I couldn't easily get a divorce in front of my grinning husband and mother-in-law. I had no choice but to swallow my anger. A week later, my mother's stroke recurred. We did everything we could, but it was not enough. My mother finally passed away. I clung to my mother and cried, and Bob also cried with me. My only mother, a mother who always thought of me and Bob until the end. Memories with my mother came back to me, and tears wouldn't stop. But still, there were things that had to be done. As the chief mourner, I held a funeral for my mother. It was a small ceremony, but people from my mother's work also came to pay their respects, and I think it was a warm funeral. However, towards the end of the funeral, I noticed something. I talked to my husband, who looked bored at the funeral hall. "Hey, aren't your parents coming?" I asked. I told them, but they said they wouldn't come. My husband said casually, surprising me. "What do you mean?" "There's no need for Dad and Mom to come to a stranger's funeral," he laughed, making me feel uneasy. Then he opened his mouth again. "By the way, is it true that you're inheriting $1.5 million? I heard from relatives." It was true. My mother inherited a lot of assets when my father died. She worked hard so that I wouldn't be in need. So almost all of my father's inheritance was left untouched for me. Even after taxes were deducted, it exceeded $1.5 million. I was angry at my husband, who not only used me but also brought up inheritance right after the funeral of my mother, whom he didn't even mourn for. He insulted single mothers like me who are poor and called them names even after their death. I will definitely show him. As I tried to sort out my emotions that were mixed with sadness for losing my mother and anger towards my husband, in the waiting room, someone put their hand on my shoulder. When I turned around in surprise, there was Bob with tears in his eyes. He looked straight at me and said, "Mom, you don't have to work hard anymore. Let's run away together." I hugged Bob silently and cried, "Thank you, Bob. Thank you, Bob." Bob had been watching over me all along and stayed by my side. I had thought that I shouldn't get a divorce for Bob's sake too, but Bob melted away my hardened feelings. Encouraged by Bob, I packed up that day and moved with Bob to the house where my mother lived. There were calls from my husband and mother-in-law immediately after that, but I ignored them all. About 3 months later, after the memorial service for my mother had settled down, on a day off while spending time leisurely with Bob at home, the intercom at the entrance rang. When I peeked out, it was my husband, whom I hadn't seen since the day of the funeral, standing there. I opened the door and glared at him. "What do you want now?" "Oh, Arya, it's been a while. I've been lonely. Bob is here too, right?" My husband spoke in a cajoling voice, grinning like a cat. So I asked again with goosebumps all over me, "What do you want? Tell me." "I just wanted to see you guys. We're family, aren't we?" My husband's voice turned cajoling. "What is that? What is your real purpose?" I kept a straight face. My husband stopped laughing in a cajoling voice. "Arya, actually, Mom has been diagnosed with cancer and is hospitalized now." "Oh, really?" I answered him back like that, which made him flustered. "Medical insurance was not taken out, so there is not enough money for medical expenses. You received an inheritance from your mother-in-law, right? $100,000? No, even $500,000 is fine. Please lend me the money," I said to my husband, who put his hands together in front of his face while looking up at me. "Why? Your family is wealthier than mine, so you don't need to borrow money." "That's because my father made a debt in his business. Now he's being chased by repayments, and he can't do anything about it." "Hey, we're family, right? Help me out," my husband answered while looking away awkwardly. "Why should I? The dying old hag can be left alone," I quoted what was said to my mother. My husband's expression changed for a moment, but then he became furious like a raging fire. "What the hell are you? How could you say something so heartless, you demon wife?" he shouted. "I just said what was said to my mother. Do you have a problem with that?" I answered calmly. My husband became even more angry and shouted, "To the family, no, to the husband. What kind of language is that? Remember that, family. To the husband, what are you talking about? We're not a family anymore." What my husband looked confused, and I handed him the divorce papers I had already filled out. "It saved me the trouble of having you come over. Sign this right away." "What? What is this?" "Divorce. Are you serious?" My husband stared at the divorce papers with a face like a pigeon that had eaten a bean. "Of course I'm serious. I'll claim not only Bob's child support but also compensation for years of mental anguish. The lawyer has already been decided." "A lawyer? Are you serious? Do you want to raise Bob as a single mother?" When my husband turned red in the face and shouted, Bob appeared from inside the house. When my husband saw Bob, he changed his tone of voice and spoke to him. "Oh, Bob, your mother said she wants to divorce your father. You don't want to become a single-parent family, do you? You don't want to be separated from your father and grandmother." Then Bob gave him a cold stare. "Did Dad ever do anything like a father should do for me?" To my stupid-sounding husband, Bob continued quietly. "Even when Dad was at home, he made Mom work hard and insulted her. And Dad's grandmother only talked bad about Mom and her deceased grandmother to me, Bob. I can't think of those people as family. What does it matter if we're a single-parent family, as long as I have Mom? When Bob said that clearly, my husband's anger turned towards Bob. What did you say? Have you forgotten the favor I did for raising you? I don't feel any gratitude at all. Even if it goes to divorce mediation, I'll testify about what Dad and Grandma did to me. What? A thing to his father. As my husband tried to approach Bob in anger, I protected him with my back and shouted at my husband, Bob has always been by my side and supported me. With such a reliable son by our side, we won't lose even if it goes to court. My husband stepped back one step from my commanding tone. I took a deep breath and said, please contact us through our lawyer from now on. Don't come near us anymore. I pushed the lawyer's business card into my stunned husband's hand and closed the door with a snap. My husband made noise outside the entrance, saying, open up or please for a while, but when I ignored him for a while, he gradually became quiet. It seems that he went home sulking. After my husband left, when I said thank you to Bob, he smiled and said, it's okay, Mom. Let's work hard together from now on. I nodded and held Bob's hand on my shoulder. After that, my husband and mother-in-law called me many times, but as I ignored them, the contact gradually decreased. 3 months later, according to rumors I heard, my husband borrowed money from relatives and paid for his mother-in-law's medical expenses. Thanks to that, his mother-in-law's illness was cured, but now they are working hard together with all their relatives to repay their debts. My mother-in-law, who had never worked before, and my father-in-law, who had only pretended to be an entrepreneur, are both working at the factory together. My husband also works as a road construction worker at night, because his earnings so far have not been enough. As for Bob and me, we sold our house so that our husbands or parents-in-law would not come near us anymore and moved into a new apartment. A new life began, and Bob helped me with housework etc., supporting me. From now on, I will live my life with the goal of making Bob happy like my deceased mother. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to the channel.